The Arizona heat clung to everything like a second skin. On the blistering tarmac of Phoenix Skyview Executive Airport, the air shimmered above the runway, warping steel into mirages and nerves into frayed wire. Engines whirred in the distance. A private jet glinted under the desert sun, sleek, silver, and promise-laced. Inside the VIP boarding corridor, everything reeked of luxury and control. Polished marble floors, citrus-scented air, whispered conversations about mergers, hedge funds, and Aspen ski chalets. And then came Ariana Bennett. She didn't need to announce herself. She moved like authority, smooth, deliberate, and unbothered. 35 years old, mahogany skin that glowed beneath the filtered skylights. Her emerald suit, tailored to precision, cut through the sterile opulence like a blade of intent. No name tag, no entourage, just a leather briefcase and the unspoken weight of someone who had clawed her way out of places no one in that terminal would dare imagine. To the staff, she looked like just another corporate traveler, too quiet to matter, too composed to challenge. But Ariana wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to observe. Because what no one on Flight 143 knew, not the silver-haired board member in Seat 2D, not the Instagram-famous couple comparing champagne brands, and certainly not the lead flight attendant standing rigid at the cabin door, was that Ariana Bennett owned the jet they were stepping onto. And within the next 2 hours, that ignorance would explode into a public reckoning. All it would take was one slap, and the entire illusion would shatter. Welcome aboard. The cabin doors hissed open with a pneumatic sigh, releasing a gust of chilled, citrus-scented air into the heat-heavy boarding tunnel. Inside the jet, everything gleamed. Brushed gold trim, butter-soft cream leather seats, ambient lighting that bathed the cabin in a quiet, otherworldly glow. It wasn't just first class, it was a floating fortress of curated luxury. Perfection, meticulously engineered. At the front stood Veronica Hale, Stratus Lux's lead flight attendant. 41, razor-sharp and unapologetically precise. Every strand of her platinum bob was frozen in place like glass. Her uniform, tailored navy, silk scarf knotted at the throat, screamed discipline. She held a digital manifest in one hand, the other curled instinctively around her waist like she was bracing for war. Veronica didn't smile. She assessed. Each passenger that stepped aboard got a rapid scan. Rolex? Check. Monogrammed carry-on? Check. Confidence level? Obnoxiously high? Even better. Then Ariana Bennett appeared at the top of the jetway. For a heartbeat, Veronica's rhythm faltered. No one else noticed, but Ariana's presence changed the temperature of the room. No badge, no personal assistant, no brand name logos screaming for validation, just a woman in an emerald green suit with clean lines, no excess. Her heels clicked softly on the brushed metal floor, steady and unhurried. The kind of walk that made time bend around her. Her eyes, dark, unreadable, swept the cabin like she already knew every inch of it. Veronica's instinct kicked in. Something was off. The woman didn't match the rest of the passenger list, at least not in appearance. Too young, too still, and most of all, too quiet. Veronica had worked luxury for 16 years, and this kind of silence usually came with status, or with something to hide. "Welcome aboard," she said, voice coated in courtesy but cool as chrome. Ariana met her gaze and replied with a polite nod, her voice velvet-lined steel. "Seat 1A." Veronica hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough. "Boarding pass?" she asked, smiling without warmth. Ariana didn't blink. "I was told this flight was manifest only." "It is," Veronica replied, stiffening. "Just protocol." Ariana reached calmly into her briefcase, pulled out a black leather wallet, and flipped it open to reveal a sleek, platinum-tier digital clearance tag. Custom. Untouchable. Veronica's eyes flicked across it. The code cleared. Everything about it screamed elite. But the doubt lingered. Not because of Ariana's credentials, but because of her composure. That dangerous kind of calm, the kind you couldn't place. And Veronica hated not being able to place someone. She stepped aside, but her smile tightened. "Right this way." As Ariana passed, Veronica's gaze narrowed. Her fingers twitched around the tablet. She hadn't felt this unsettled in years. Behind Ariana, Gregory and Elise Walcott boarded. Gregory's loafers cost more than most monthly salaries. Elise's perfume was laced with white truffle oil and soft judgment. Veronica greeted them like royalty. "Mr. and Mrs. Walcott, welcome back. We've chilled your preferred rosé." Elise glanced at Ariana, then back at Veronica. She didn't speak, but the implication floated like smoke. Veronica gave the subtlest nod of agreement. Then quietly, she marked a red asterisk beside seat 1A on her tablet. Not to flag Ariana as suspicious, Veronica wasn't that reckless. It was a reminder. Watch her. As she returned to the galley, Veronica's jaw was tight. She didn't know Ariana Bennett, but something about her, her stillness, her silence, unnerved her. And in Veronica's world, that kind of quiet always meant trouble. The hum of the engines whispered in the background, barely audible beneath the gentle symphony of crystal clinking and ambient jazz. The passengers of Flight 143 had settled in like royalty on a throne, legs crossed, tablets glowing, flutes of Perrier Jouet perched on polished armrests. Everything flowed smoothly, except for Veronica Hale. From the galley, she watched Ariana Bennett through narrowed eyes. Not overtly. Not enough for the cameras discreetly placed throughout the cabin to catch. But her mind was already racing. Seat 1A had become a riddle she couldn't solve, and Veronica hated unsolved puzzles. Ariana sat with legs crossed and posture perfect, quietly reviewing something on her phone. She hadn't requested champagne, hadn't spoken a word to the other passengers. But she commanded the space in a way that unsettled Veronica. Passengers noticed too. Across the aisle, Elise Walcott leaned toward her husband, her whisper wrapped in disdain. "Does she work for someone?" Gregory Walcott barely lifted his eyes from the journal. "Doubt it, but you know how these new money types are, always trying to blend in." Elise sniffed, trying a bit too hard. Veronica walked past them with a crisp nod, but her lips curled ever so slightly. She didn't need their approval, she expected it. But Ariana, she didn't seek approval, she existed above it. That was the threat. At row 3, Jordan Massey, a 22-year-old intern and son of one of the airline's board members, stole glances toward the front. He'd been briefed to observe staff professionalism on this flight, a formality meant to help him understand company culture. What he didn't expect was the visible tension forming between the lead flight attendant and the woman in seat 1A. Jordan took notes on his phone, frowning slightly. Back in the galley, Veronica felt the pressure mounting. A text had just buzzed in from her supervisor. "Board presence confirmed. Keep this flight flawless." She stared at those words, board presence. Her eyes shot toward Jordan, but the intern was too green. Couldn't be him. A ripple of paranoia unfurled in her chest. Was it her? The thought sent a jolt of heat crawling up her spine. Veronica stepped into the aisle again, face composed, mask flawless. She started with the Walcotts, more rosé for Elise, a quick laugh at Gregory's stale investment joke, and then moved back, serving others with mechanical grace. But when she reached Ariana, she didn't slow down. No drink, no eye contact. Just a smooth glide past her row like the seat was empty. A deliberate omission. Ariana watched her without a word, not a flinch, not a plea. But her eyes said everything. That calm, assessing gaze didn't waver, didn't blink. And somehow, that rattled Veronica more than if Ariana had snapped or demanded service. Nearby, the influencer couple with matching platinum headphones paused their podcast and watched the moment unfold. Subtle tension laced the air, sensed but unspoken. Veronica turned on her heel, but the silence behind her dragged like a hook in the skin. From her seat, Ariana slowly adjusted her posture, crossed the other leg, slid her phone into her blazer pocket. Her movements were precise, almost surgical. She wasn't just enduring, she was documenting. And Veronica could feel it. Returning to the galley, Veronica gripped the counter with one hand, her breathing shallow. She wasn't just annoyed now, she was threatened. And when Veronica Hale felt threatened, she struck where it hurt. She tapped the crew call button and summoned Grace, the junior flight attendant, a soft-spoken woman barely 2 years in. She's in the wrong seat, Veronica said, voice low. I want her moved before we reach cruising altitude. Grace hesitated. Did you check the manifest? Veronica's eyes narrowed. I don't need to, trust me. But Grace didn't look convinced, and that flicker of doubt, it only made the storm stronger, because now the mask was cracking, and behind it, Veronica's fear was starting to show. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber as the jet reached cruising altitude, casting a golden hue across the brushed gold and cream interior. A subtle scent of bergamot floated through the air. Passengers nestled into their seats, blissfully unaware that the tension near row 1 was about to snap. Veronica Hale stood motionless just outside the galley, her eyes locked on seat 1A, like a sniper on target. Her breathing had steadied, but her jaw remained clenched. Every time she looked at Ariana Bennett, she felt control slipping through her perfectly manicured fingers. She couldn't allow that. With the practiced poise of someone used to performing under pressure, Veronica stepped forward. Her heels clicked like warning shots against the carpeted floor. She stopped just beside Ariana, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes sharp. Ma'am, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to move. This seat is reserved for our executive circle guests. Ariana looked up slowly, her expression calm but unreadable. I believe I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. A few passengers looked over. Veronica's smile hardened. Let's not make this difficult. I'd hate to involve security. Then perhaps you should consult your manifest before making assumptions, Ariana replied smoothly. Gasps, soft but unmistakable, fluttered from nearby seats. Elise Walcott leaned toward the aisle, eager to catch the unfolding drama. Jordan Massey sat up straighter, fingers twitching over his phone's notes app. Veronica's nostrils flared. I don't need to check anything, she snapped, her voice cutting through the ambient jazz like glass. I know who belongs in this section and who doesn't. Ariana's gaze didn't flicker. Then you know this seat was assigned to A. Bennett. That's me. Silence, even the engines seemed to dull. Veronica crossed her arms, speaking louder this time. If you do not comply, I will personally escort you to the rear cabin. The word rear hung in the air like a slur. Ariana didn't move. You're escalating a situation that could have been avoided with basic courtesy. Or with honesty, Veronica snapped. Now all eyes were on them. From 2 rows back, the influencer began live streaming quietly. Elise Walcott whispered, she's clearly trying to pull something. Gregory nodded. Entitlement always shows itself eventually. Veronica smirked, emboldened by the murmurs. She turned to the passengers. We have rules for a reason, folks. Some people think they can just slip into places they don't belong. Ariana sat still, her posture composed, her voice like silk over steel. I've asked for nothing more than the same respect everyone else receives. And if that's too much, maybe the seat that doesn't belong isn't mine. A beat of silence, then Veronica leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. People like you always think rules don't apply. And then she stepped back and raised her voice again. This is your final warning. Move, or I will have you removed. Ariana tilted her head, her voice even but chillingly quiet. Call whoever you need to, but I'm not going anywhere. Grace stood a few feet away, frozen. Her hand hovered near the passenger manifest, her lips parted, wanting to speak, to intervene. But she didn't. Fear of reprisal pinned her to the spot. Veronica, fuming, stepped closer. You don't get to defy crew orders, she said, her tone boiling over. You think you're above protocol. Because of what? Attitude. Then, in one calculated move, Veronica turned her body just enough, and her elbow accidentally knocked Ariana's armrest. Ariana's glass of water tipped, spilling across her lap. Gasps. Oh, look what you've done, Veronica said theatrically. Maybe if you weren't in the wrong seat, this wouldn't have happened. Ariana stood slowly, water dripping from her slacks. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. But the look in her eyes silenced the entire cabin. You've made a mistake, she said, each word cold and deliberate. Veronica's smirk faltered. Excuse me. Ariana leaned in slightly, her voice still low but thunderous in its certainty. You've mistaken my silence for weakness. And now the entire cabin waited, not for the next insult, But for the fallout, a heavy silence swallowed the cabin. The atmosphere, once infused with luxury and soft jazz, now felt like a pressure cooker, seconds from explosion. Every passenger could feel it, that crackling tension between Veronica Hale and Ariana Bennett, now standing inches apart in row 1. Water glistened on Ariana's slacks, soaking into the tailored emerald fabric. She didn't move to dry herself. Her calm was too precise, too unnerving. It wasn't passive, it was intentional. And that unnerved Veronica more than if she had screamed. In seat 2A, Jordan Massey felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just a service issue anymore. This was spiraling into something else, something dangerous. Veronica's cheeks flushed a deep red. Her fingers twitched at her sides, fists nearly forming. The eyes of the cabin burned into her. The judgment, the quiet disapproval, her control, her power, her image, all unraveling, thread by thread. And then, Elise Walcott scoffed from row 3. "She's clearly just looking for attention," she muttered, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. That did it. Veronica's mask cracked. She stepped forward in one sharp motion, her voice now shrill. "You've been nothing but disruptive since you boarded this flight. You think you can sit here, play victim, and disrespect my crew?" Ariana didn't flinch. Disrespect happens when someone is denied basic humanity, and you crossed that line the moment you assumed I didn't belong. Veronica's face contorted, the kind of anger that wasn't about protocol anymore, it was personal. Her voice dropped into a dangerous hiss. "People like you always think they're special." The words barely left her lips before her hand moved. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin. Veronica's open palm collided with Ariana's cheek. Gasps rippled through the jet like a sonic boom. The influencer's phone fell from their hand. Gregory Walcott's paper dropped to his lap. Jordan stood up halfway, jaw slack. Even Grace, the junior attendant, dropped her tray of Perrier bottles, the glass shattering across the galley floor. Ariana stood frozen, not in shock, not in fear, but in fury restrained. Her head slowly turned back to face Veronica. The red mark across her cheek bloomed beneath the cabin's amber lights. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes had hardened into something steel-cold and surgical. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career," she said softly, her voice steady as marble. Veronica's chest rose and fell rapidly, adrenaline still pulsing. She stepped back as if realizing too late what she'd just done. She provoked me," she stammered, turning toward the passengers. "You all saw—" But no one nodded. No one moved. Jordan Massey, now standing, shook his head in disbelief. He reached for his phone. Grace finally found her voice. "Veronica, she's not just a passenger." Veronica spun around. "What are you talking about?" "She's Ariana Bennett," Grace whispered, like a confession laced with awe. "Founder of Apex Biotech. She owns part of Stratus Lux." Veronica's mouth fell open. Her eyes flicked toward Ariana, who stood taller now, each inch of her radiating power earned from 1,000 battles no one in that cabin could imagine. "You didn't know," Ariana said, "because you didn't bother to ask. You assumed. And then you acted." The doors to the cockpit slid open. The captain stepped out, pale as ash. He walked directly toward row 1. "Ms. Bennett," he said, voice tight with urgency, "we received your alert. Head office has confirmed your authority." Then he turned to Veronica. "You are to step down from duty immediately. Do not speak. Do not move." Veronica's knees buckled. This can't be happening. But it was. Ariana remained silent. She returned to her seat without another word, her presence commanding, her silence damning. And above them, the seatbelt sign blinked on. But it was too late, because the turbulence now wasn't coming from the sky. The cabin of Flight 143 had transformed into a pressure chamber. No one dared speak above a whisper, not after what had just unfolded. The slap, the revelation, the captain's intervention, it had pulled the oxygen out of the air, leaving only shock and anticipation. Passengers clutched armrests. Some covertly recorded from their phones. Others simply watched, transfixed, as Veronica Hale, once the poised gatekeeper of elite travel, stood rooted in place, her carefully constructed world crashing down around her. The captain, a man in his early 50s with silver temples and the hardened gaze of someone used to controlling emergencies, stepped fully into the aisle. His voice was crisp, but barely veiled with anger. "Veronica," he said, locking eyes with her, "you are hereby relieved of your duties for the remainder of this flight. We've been instructed to initiate an unscheduled landing to address the incident with corporate and law enforcement." Veronica's breath caught. You're diverting the plane." "Yes," he said without hesitation, "and I suggest you sit. Now." The passengers began to murmur, the tone shifting from confusion to hushed awe. Veronica's face crumpled as she looked at Ariana Bennett. Now seated again, elegant and composed, the redness on her cheek already fading, but the weight of her silence growing louder by the second. She tried once more. "Ms. Bennett, I didn't know who you were. I swear, if I had—" Ariana turned her head, slow and deliberate. "You shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them like a human being." It wasn't anger in her voice, it was truth, delivered like a gavel. Veronica's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. The captain turned to Grace, who stood nearby with wide, tear-glossed eyes. "Ms. Foster," he said, "please resume service. You're now the senior flight attendant for the remainder of this flight." Grace blinked, stunned. Yes, Captain." Passengers applauded, soft at first, then stronger, growing with every second. Even Gregory Walcott, who had earlier scoffed, nodded slowly, his expression unreadable but no longer smug. Elise stayed silent. Across the aisle, Jordan Massey, still taking notes, now visibly shaken, typed something with renewed urgency. A text to his father read, "You're not going to believe what just happened. I think we need to review HR and bias protocols ASAP." The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced, "we are making an unscheduled landing at Las Vegas Executive Terminal. Please remain seated and secure your belongings." At that moment, the sleek black Cadillac Escalade, waiting on the tarmac, became more than a luxury. It became justice on wheels. As the plane descended, Veronica sat trembling near the back, stripped of her authority, reduced to a shell of the woman who had tried to dominate the cabin just an hour earlier. Meanwhile, Ariana sat still, her gaze fixed out the window. But she wasn't looking at the lights of Las Vegas. She was remembering. She remembered being 23, fresh out of Howard, told by a recruiter she didn't look the part. She remembered boardroom stares that lingered too long. She remembered being underestimated constantly until she built Apex Biotech from her kitchen and turned it into a billion-dollar empire. This wasn't her first confrontation with bias, but it was the first time she'd faced it in her own sky. The wheels touched down with a thud, and the plane taxied toward a private gate where 2 security officers and Ariana's assistants waited with calm authority. The cabin held its collective breath. Veronica tried once more, rising shakily. "Please, Ms. Bennett, don't let it end like this." Ariana stood, her assistant handing her a fresh blazer. She turned to face Veronica. "It didn't start with me," she said, voice clear, "but I'll make sure it ends with you." And with that, she stepped off the plane, heels clicking against the jet's floor like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence no one would ever forget. The jet rolled to a smooth stop at a private terminal on the edge of Las Vegas Executive Airport. Through the windows, passengers could see the scene waiting for them. 2 uniformed officers, a sleek black SUV idling beside the tarmac, and a pair of assistants in navy suits standing still as statues. They weren't here to welcome a celebrity, they were here to enforce consequences. Inside the cabin, a strange stillness had settled. The luxury felt hollow now, gilded silence, thick with reckoning. Ariana Bennett stood slowly, smoothing the sleeve of her fresh blazer, the emerald fabric catching the cabin lights like armor. Her previous suit, soaked from Veronica's deliberate spill, had been quietly replaced by her assistant during the descent. Now she looked untouched, untouchable. She turned toward the aisle, her eyes scanning the cabin. Some passengers looked away, ashamed. Others stared with admiration. Jordan Massey sat frozen in place, lips parted, the weight of what he'd witnessed still sinking in. His text to the board had already been sent. Veronica Hale, once the Ice Queen of the Skies, now sat slumped near the galley, stripped of her authority, her uniform rumpled and her eyes wide with panic. She looked at Ariana not with contempt now, but desperation. As Ariana stepped into the aisle, Veronica rose too quickly, stumbling forward. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper, I didn't know. I didn't mean to." Ariana raised a hand, not to strike but to stop her, and somehow the gesture felt even more powerful. "You didn't need to know who I was," Ariana said, voice smooth but unwavering. "You just needed to treat me with dignity. You failed. Repeatedly." Veronica's voice cracked. "I was under pressure. The board was watching. I thought if I kept order—" "You confused control with superiority," Ariana interrupted, her eyes narrowing. "You thought silence meant weakness. That decorum meant permission. And when your assumptions weren't validated, you lashed out." Tears pricked the corners of Veronica's eyes, but Ariana didn't stop. "You humiliated me. You denied me service. You slapped me in front of witnesses. And the only reason you're sorry now is because you're facing the consequences." Veronica reached out, one last grasp at control. "I was trying to protect the standard of the airline." Ariana stepped forward, closing the distance, her voice a low flame. "I am the standard of this airline." A hush fell across the cabin again. She turned toward the officers waiting just outside the open cabin door. "She assaulted me in the air, in front of over a dozen witnesses," Ariana said, loud enough for the entire plane to hear. "I'm pressing charges." The officers nodded, stepping forward. Veronica backed away, stumbling. "Wait, please, this is all a misunderstanding." But her words were drowned out by the unmistakable click of handcuffs. As the officers read her rights, the passengers watched in stunned silence. Some filmed. Others simply stared, as if they couldn't quite believe the unraveling of power they were witnessing. Veronica's eyes locked with Ariana's one last time. But the pleading was gone. There was only defeat. Ariana turned to Grace, who stood beside the beverage cart, face pale but steady. "You did the right thing," Ariana said gently, "and I remember people who do the right thing when it's hardest." Grace nodded, her eyes glassy. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett." Ariana offered a soft smile, then stepped off the aircraft, her heels meeting the tarmac with a quiet authority that needed no microphone. The sun had dipped lower now, casting long shadows over the runway. Her assistant held the SUV door open. She slid inside, her posture regal, her silence more commanding than any speech. Inside the jet, no one spoke. The curtain had fallen. But the echo of Ariana's final words, and the image of power reclaimed, would linger long after the engines cooled. The Escalade pulled away from the private terminal, its dark silhouette gliding across the tarmac like a moving monument to quiet power. Inside, Ariana Bennett sat back against the leather seat, the Vegas skyline glimmering in the distance through tinted windows. She wasn't thinking about the cameras or the headlines already forming online. She wasn't replaying Veronica's breakdown, the slap, or the applause that came after. She was thinking about a girl on the south side of Chicago, 10 years old, walking into a science fair with homemade slides in a shoebox and dreams no one else could see. That girl never imagined she'd own an airline, but she always knew what it felt like to be dismissed. The difference now? She wasn't asking for space anymore, she was commanding it. Later that week, Ariana appeared in a televised interview, seated across from a seasoned host, known for his no-nonsense questions. The backdrop was sleek and minimal, no distractions. Just her, a microphone, and a story the world couldn't stop watching. "What do you think this moment has taught people?" the host asked, leaning forward. Ariana paused, her expression steady. Her voice, when it came, was measured, each word a deliberate step on solid ground. It taught them that respect shouldn't be a reward for status, it should be the starting point, for everyone. She glanced at the camera. "You don't have to wear a crown to deserve decency. You don't need a billion-dollar portfolio to be worthy of dignity. And you shouldn't have to reveal your power just to receive basic human courtesy." The interviewer nodded, visibly moved. "What would you say to someone who's facing quiet discrimination but doesn't have your platform?" Ariana's voice softened. "I'd say, your worth isn't up for negotiation. And silence is powerful when used with intention. You don't have to scream to demand change, but you do have to stand. In the weeks that followed, Stratus Lux Air implemented sweeping changes. Mandatory bias training, anonymous passenger feedback tied directly to employee performance reviews, a new initiative called Flight Forward, aimed at recruiting and elevating underrepresented voices in aviation. But the ripple went further. Other luxury service providers took note. The footage of Veronica's outburst and arrest went viral. So did Ariana's composure. People weren't just inspired, they were awakened. In lounges, offices, and classrooms across the country, conversations shifted, and so did expectations. 1 month later, Ariana boarded another Stratus Lux flight, this time as a clearly listed VIP, though she'd made no request for special treatment. The crew greeted her with sincerity, not fear. Grace, now in a crisp uniform with new rank pins at her collar, personally welcomed her aboard. "Thank you for flying with us, Ms. Bennett," she said with a warm smile. Ariana smiled back. "You've earned your wings, Grace." The flight took off without incident. No tension, no scenes, just the soft hum of engines and the clink of ice against glass. But what Ariana cherished most wasn't the peace. It was the proof that change didn't have to roar. It could land softly, with purpose, with poise, and still reshape everything. Life lesson: sometimes the most powerful statements don't come from shouting, they come from restraint. From standing your ground, even when the world tells you to move. From believing that dignity isn't something given, it's something claimed over and over until the world starts to adjust. Because the truth is simple, you don't have to prove you belong when you know who you are. And when you lead from that place, quietly, unapologetically, relentlessly, even the sky takes notice. In the aftermath of it all, the slap, the silence, the landing, the truth, the greatest takeaway wasn't just about justice. It wasn't about a woman reclaiming her space or firing someone who deserved it. The real lesson lived deeper, beneath the headlines and the viral clips. It was about what power looks like when it's quiet. Ariana Bennett didn't win that confrontation because she raised her voice or threatened retaliation. She won because she understood something far more profound. That true power isn't about domination. It's about restraint. It's about knowing who you are so deeply, so undeniably, that no insult, no slight, no slap can shake your foundation. She didn't flinch because she knew her value wasn't hanging in the air. It was rooted. In a world obsessed with appearance, with noise, with showing off credentials to gain respect, Ariana chose a different path. She let the assumptions pile up, let the bias reveal itself, and then, when the moment came, she held up a mirror. Not with rage, with grace. That's the power of presence. That's the impact of stillness, backed by strength. Veronica Hale fell not because she made a mistake, but because she mistook Ariana's composure for weakness. She misjudged, like so many do, believing status comes from skin tone, clothing, or noise. But status, real status, is carried in posture, in silence, in how you refuse to be moved by disrespect. And for anyone watching, whether you've ever been overlooked, talked over, or underestimated, the message is this: you don't have to shout to change a room. You don't have to shrink to make others comfortable. You don't have to be known to be worthy. You just have to stand, calmly, consistently, and unapologetically. Let the world catch up. Ariana didn't just board that plane as a passenger, she walked on as a lesson. And when she walked off, the world walked with her. Because dignity doesn't ask permission. And respect, it's not a reward, it's a right. Never let anyone, no matter how polished, how powerful, how loud, convince you otherwise. If this story moved you, if you felt the tension, the triumph, and the power of quiet strength, then don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe to the X Daily Stories channel for more real, gripping tales that expose injustice, celebrate dignity, and remind us what true leadership looks like. We drop powerful stories every week, crafted to make you feel, think, and remember. Join our community, turn on notifications, and never miss a moment where ordinary people rise, assumptions fall, and silence becomes a force to be reckoned with. This isn't just entertainment, it's a movement. See you in the next story.